Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is CWC Zeppelin and I make consistent Argent Saga content every Tuesday and Thursday. This week I am trying to present to you guys a beginner's guide because I noticed there's not a whole lot of help out there for beginners. There is a great collection of videos from the ARG team itself, but I figured maybe I'd combine everything into one and try and simplify it the best way I can. So if this is helpful to you, please leave a like and comment below, and also subscribe for continuous content. Now with that being said, let's get into it. So first, let's go over the key players of this game. So the main focus of the game revolves around the 5 towers of power, which you can see here. Now, these are the original towers. We do have 5 additionals, but I'm not going to go into them just for complexity's sake, okay? So these 5 towers are basically your life points. If you have played Magic the Gathering or Yu-Gi-Oh!, you have life points. Well, in this game, you have towers. And the goal of this game is to destroy all 5 of these towers and then make one final attack on your opponent to win the game, okay? Now, you do this by having cards called units, which are signified here on the lower part of the card. And we'll get into all of these cards individually through this guide. You also have augments, which are signified there. Spells, also there. Champions, which if you've played Magic, this is kind of like your commander. It's something that is always on the field, and it's kind of the way you build your deck. And then spirits, also a support character to your champion, and also a helpful way to build decks. So, with that being said, let's get into the nitty-gritty with units, spells, augments, and shards. First things first, with your unit, you'll notice 2 key things here. The 1 at the top left corner of the card, which signifies the cost of the card, and then the power, which is signified in the top middle of the card here. But we'll get into the power later. The first thing I want to go over is just the cost. Now, in order to bring out this card, you need something called Shard Light, which is this game's mana if you play Magic the Gathering. Right here, we have something called an Argent Shard, and this produces Shard Light. It does this by pretty much exhausting it or tapping it. And all that means is you turn it to the right to signify that the card's effect has been used, and it produces 1, which means you can then play Amateur Witch. You also have spells in the game, which are a one-time use. You basically play the spell, and then it goes to your discard zone. This spell has a cost of 2, so that means you will need 2 Argent Shards to produce 2, so you would have to tap 2 Argent Shards to bring this card out. One thing to note about spells is they have a unique ability called Instacast, which can be signified by the little lightning bolt on the top left corner next to the cost, or in the text of the card, the effect of the card down here on the bottom. What this means is you can play this card during your opponent's turn, where normally your units or your spells, if they do not have the Instacast ability, can only be played on your turn. So that's a unique effect to spells right now. And then augments are basically a continuous spell. So spells are a one-time use. You play them from your hand, and then they go to the discard zone. An augment is a continuous spell of sorts. You pay the cost for the augment, and then it stays in the augment zone. The augment zone is kind of unique. It doesn't have a maximum amount of cards you can be played there. So if you ran 40 augments in your deck, all 40 can be on the field at the same time. So, some key notes on this, right? The first thing is units, spells, and augments, they can only be played on your turn unless it has that Instacast ability. The second thing is units remain on the field until they're destroyed by another unit or ability. So if you have 5 units on the field, which is the max you can have, you cannot remove a unit to play another unit until it is destroyed. You can't just swap them in and out. Number 3, spells are a one-time use effect while augments are continuous. And again, you can control an unlimited amount of augments. Let's move on now to champions and spirits. Champions are your main characters. They're pretty much how you build your deck. Now, champions have unique abilities. As you can see here on Jamal Cryptic Caster, he places one counter on himself whenever a water unit comes into play on your field. You can then remove 3 counters from him and draw 2 cards, then discard 1. Now, champion effects can be used during your turn or your opponent's turn unless they specify otherwise, okay? The other key thing to note about champions is they have the 5 element colors, essentially, like your towers. There are 5 color towers, and there are 5 color champions. Jamal is the blue champion. That means your cards in your deck need to be blue. You cannot run light cards, you cannot run red cards, you cannot run green cards, or purple/dark cards. If you're running Jamal, you need to run blue cards. Same thing with Liam. Liam, you need to run light cards. Dragonholt, red cards. Aiton, air cards. Hoenna, dark cards, right? And these champions all have their own unique abilities, kind of like Jamal. The way to get around this is playing spirits. Now, spirits have a unique kind of indicator on the top left corner here. Luna, for example, has an 8 in her top left corner. This is what they call an affinity number. This signifies the amount of dark cards you can run in your deck if you are running Luna. So if you're playing Jamal as your champion, right above him, the blue card, and Luna, that means your deck will need to be blue cards along with 8 dark cards. So the spirits allow you to run multicolor decks, basically. One thing to note, though, is your spirits, you don't have to run 8 dark cards if you run Luna. You can either run 8 or 0. Okay? That means if you just want to run the spirit, you can run all blue cards, no dark cards, and still run the spirit. But it has to be 0 or 8. The other unique thing about the spirits is an ability called Soul Bursting. So if you see the card text on Luna, she reads, when you destroy a tower unit in battle, place 1 counter on this card. During your turn, you remove 3 counters from Luna, and your opponent discards 1 card. This is a continuous effect. You can use it as many times as possible. If you had 9 counters on Luna, you can use it all 3 times, right? Now, she also has a unique ability underneath there called Soul Bursting. Her Soul Burst says your opponent discards 1 card. And what Soul Bursting means, you can see it there in parentheses. It says flip this card face down. So you'll have to flip your spirit from face up to face down to utilize that ability. That means you can no longer use the first effect of Luna for the rest of the game, unless you flip her back up. And yes, there are cards that do that in the game. But like Luna and your champions, you also have other colors. So if you wanted to run white-blue, or light red, or blue-red, green-blue, you can do that as long as you have the corresponding spirit to do so. So something else we need to go over are something called Argent Cards. Basically what I was just telling you with the champions is based on your champion, you'll need to run that color card. So if you're running Jamal, you'll have to run blue cards in your deck, right? Now, if you're running Luna as your spirit with Jamal, you can also run dark cards. There are also things in this game called Argent Cards, which are colorless, as you can see here with Silver Mist Phoenix, or Shard Mech Subasa, or even Bone Scavenger. They do not have a color. This means that they can be run in any deck, no matter what color your champion or your spirit are. You can basically have a blue champion and have all Argent cards in it if you want. So, that's something to note. Now, we're going to get into the towers. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the 5 towers of power are the key to winning the game. You need to destroy the 5 towers and then have one more final attack before your opponent loses the game. So we have some key notes here, and I'll go through these one by one as we're talking about the towers. First things first, the towers have a designated area on the field, and I will show that in a video here shortly. But all of your towers start the game face down, and it is randomized, so neither you or your opponent know which towers are which. The other key thing to note is towers do not have power like units, they only have defense, okay? And this will come up later. When a tower is attacked, it is flipped face up, so then you can see the defense of the tower and which one you're attacking. And this is whenever you apply damage or do damage calculation between a unit and a tower. So for number 4, it says if a unit's power is greater than or equal to the tower it's attacking, the tower is then destroyed. And this is signified by essentially flipping the tower upside down. That's how you know that the tower is destroyed, okay? If a unit's power is less than the tower's defense, the tower remains face up, but it maintains that damage till the end of the turn. So if, let's say, the Tower of Light was attacked by a unit with 1,000 power, the Tower of Light would not be destroyed, but it would have 1,000 damage on it. So if you could deal another 500 damage to the Tower of Light, it would then be destroyed. But if your opponent has no other attacks that turn, at the start of your turn, all of that damage goes away, and then your opponent would then have to deal 1,500 damage to the Tower of Light to destroy it. Lastly, whenever a tower is destroyed, its effect then triggers. Key thing to note, tower effects cannot be responded to. So for this example, let's take the Tower of Fire on the far right. The Tower of Fire says when this card is destroyed, you can destroy a unit. That's your unit or your opponent's unit. That means that whenever this is destroyed, you can then choose a unit to destroy, and your opponent cannot respond to it. They cannot play cards that would prevent their unit from being destroyed or something like that. That's what that means, okay? Let's move on now to a key interaction in the game called combat. Now, combat revolves around your towers or units. Now, this is where the power of your units come into play, right? And on Amateur Witch here, they have 1,000 power each. There's 2 types of combat in the game, unit-to-unit combat and unit-to-tower combat. Units, whenever they are attacking, they need to exhaust themselves, just like shards, right? To produce one with a shard, you need to exhaust it. Same thing with a unit. To signify an attack, you need to exhaust it. So for unit-to-unit combat, there are some key things to note. Units cannot be exhausted, so they can't attack or activate abilities, because there are some units out there that have exhaust abilities, but they can't be used the turn that they are played. Now, there are effects in the game that get around this rule, and we'll get into that a little later, but that is a key thing to note. If you have something like Amateur Witch here, and you play her on your first turn, she cannot attack that turn. You need to wait a full turn to then exhaust her. The other thing is for unit-to-unit combat, you can only attack units that are exhausted. So unless the unit is exhausted, you cannot attack. So if Amateur Witch, you see the 2 on the screen here, were both in the state they were in, the Amateur Witch on the left cannot attack the Amateur Witch on the right because it is not exhausted. If it is exhausted, however, you can. And that's where number 3 comes in. So let's say Amateur Witch on the right were exhausted. You would then declare an attack with Amateur Witch on the left, tap it, or exhaust it, and then you would compare the power. Now, they both have 1,000 power. That means both of them would be destroyed in this instance, because the Amateur Witch on the left is dealing 1,000 damage to Amateur Witch on the right, and then so on and so forth. The other thing is, and this is a common question, is okay, well, how do I defend my units or my towers? You cannot block with a unit unless it has the Guardian ability, and I'll get into that later. So unit versus tower combat, and I kind of went over these when we were talking about the towers, but let's review. So again, towers start the game face down, so you don't know what you're attacking. Whenever a tower is attacked, though, it's then flipped face up, and then you calculate damage. The other thing to note is towers do not have power, only defense. That means, let's say Amateur Witch is attacking Tower of Air, the green tower on the bottom left. Since they both have 1,000, Amateur Witch is dealing 1,000 power to the Tower of Air's defense. That means the Tower of Air would be destroyed and Amateur Witch would remain because the Tower of Air is not dealing damage. It just has defense. That's what that means. So now that you know the basic combat system, something that I want to introduce is blocking. Now, we still have all of our same things here, right? Amateur Witch and then our 5 towers. Now, let's say Amateur Witch is attacking a tower and you want to defend against that. If you have a unit like Quorum Phalanx here, he has the Guardian ability. So let's say Amateur Witch attacks. She would then exhaust herself to declare the attack. Since Quorum Phalanx has the Guardian ability, as it reads there, it says you can exhaust this card to make an attacking unit attack this one instead. So even though Amateur Witch may be targeting a tower to attack, since Quorum Phalanx is on the field, you can then exhaust Quorum Phalanx and have Amateur Witch attack Quorum Phalanx. Okay? So, with that being said, we have our unit versus unit combat rules here, which we talked about on the last slide, I guess you could say. And all of those rules still apply here, right? Now, units with Guardian, just to take a look at these 4 little blurbs, units with Guardian can only activate that ability if it's in the active position. So if you were to attack with Quorum Phalanx and he would be exhausted, you cannot use his Guardian ability because in order to use his Guardian ability, you need to exhaust him. So that's what rule number 1 is pertaining to. Rule number 2, it says you can only block with 1 Guardian unit at a time. So if you have 2 Quorum Phalanx on the field and your opponent attacks with Amateur Witch, you cannot block with both units. You can only use the Guardian ability once, essentially. Not per turn, but just per battle. Number 3, it pertains to the same number 3 as the unit versus unit combat. Basically, whenever your opponent is attacking and you choose to use the Guardian ability, you'll still compare the power. So Amateur Witch would attack in this instance, and Quorum Phalanx would try and block her. If it's successful, you would then compare the unit's power. Amateur Witch has 1,000 power, Quorum Phalanx has 1,500 power. So in this instance, Amateur Witch would be destroyed and sent to the discard zone, and Quorum Phalanx would remain on the field. Now, number 4 says, if your Guardian is somehow destroyed or removed from the field before damage is calculated, you cannot attempt to use the Guardian ability with another unit. That means if Amateur Witch were to attack and Quorum Phalanx were to activate the Guardian ability to try and block it, if your opponent then uses some kind of effect to remove Quorum Phalanx from the field, you cannot then use another Guardian unit to then try and guard again. You've already missed that opportunity, and then the play continues as normal. That's what that means, okay? Next, we have the setup. So we've gone through all of the cards. We know everything that you need to utilize in the game to try and win. So this is what a standard setup looks like, okay? You have your champion in the top left. You have your spirit directly underneath the champion. They remain face up the entire game unless, of course, you use your Spirit Soul Burst ability, which then it would be flipped face down. Then on the far right of the field, you have your main deck, which will have anywhere from 40 to 60 cards. In this instance, it's going to be a mixture of blue cards or dark cards. Also, maybe some Argent cards. You never know. And then you have your shard deck, which is directly underneath it. Your shard deck consists of 10 shards, which we've gone over here, which are these Argent shards, where, again, if you tap them, they produce 1. Those go directly to your shard zone, which is underneath the tower zone. Up top, you have your unit zone. That's where your units go. You have 5 open zones directly in front of your towers, which, as you know, you start the game off with your towers face down. And then you also have your hand, which are your 5 cards to start the game, and then you also have a 7-card max. You can't have more than 7 cards in your hand at the end of your turn. And of course, your hand is hidden. So the last thing I'm going to go over in this video are the phases of the game. So your first phase is the draw phase. Basically, at the beginning of your turn, you draw 1 card from the top of your main deck, right? Although, if it's the first turn of the game, you skip this phase. One thing to note is cards with Instacast can be used during this phase. So next, we have the charge phase. Now, the charge phase is whenever the turn player turns all of his exhausted cards to active. That means if you attacked or if you exhausted one of your shards to bring out a card, that card will then untap. So you can utilize its abilities that turn. Something else that happens during this phase is you take the top card of your shard deck and you put it into the shard zone. So if it was your first turn, you would take the top card of your shard deck, put it into play. So you would have 1 Argent shard to play. Now if it's your second turn, you would then take another card off the top of your shard deck and you will now have 2 shards to play that turn, and so on and so forth until you get to your max of 10. Once you hit your 10th turn, you will still untap or unexhaust all of your cards. You just will not add the top card of your shard deck to your shard zone because you will be out. Key thing to note, no cards can be played during this phase. It kind of all happens at once, so keep that in mind. Next is the main phase. This is essentially where everything happens. If it's your turn, this is where you play your spells that don't have instacast, or you cast your units, or you play your augment cards during that phase. This is also the phase where you can enter battle steps, which pretty much involve combat, which we've gone over. And you may enter the battle step as many times as able, if you want to. Let's say you have 5 units on the field. You can declare an attack with 1 unit, and then after that combat phase has ended, you can play a spell card. And then after your spell card has been played, you can then enter the battle step again and attack with your second unit. And then after that battle step is over, you can then play another card, and so on and so forth. You don't have to only have 1 battle step. This is something that was hard for me as a Yu-Gi-Oh player to get used to this, but you can essentially have as many battle steps as you want as long as you're able to attack with those units. And then lastly is the end phase. So you basically end your turn, and play is then passed to your opponent. You can also play cards with Instacast during this phase. So there you have it, guys. This is my version of a beginner's guide to the game. These are all the things that I find to be most important about the game to help anyone starting out. Now, if you have any questions or any additional comments, please let me know below, and I can answer them there for you. I'm going to leave as many links and resources as I possibly can in the description below to help you guys become masters at this game. Like any kind of card game, though, it's very complex. There's a lot of things to learn. So I suggest you go read the comprehensive rules on the Argent Saga website, and then also watch some gameplay videos. I'll leave a little thumbnail at the end of this video that you guys can click on and maybe get a feel for how the game plays. Well, that's it for me, guys. So as always, like, comment, and subscribe. Zeppelin out.